and this is going to sound brutal, they don't care. They don't care why you care about animals. They most likely eat chicken that night for dinner. Thank you so much for inviting me to present. I'm so excited to speak about how sanctuaries can influence the public through lobbying the government. It's something very near and dear to my heart. I guess I'll introduce myself first. So my name is
Hi,
Liz.
Liz. Liz,
Oh,
hi.
yeah.
This is
Hi.
Bianca from the conference team. I'm sitting here with people looking forward to your talk. And I have like this short text
Oh,
that I would just read out about you, and then you can
okay.
start right away. So,
Sorry, I probably got ahead of myself. I'm so
no
excited.
worries, Liz. We're so happy to have you here with us. Woo! Can you hear that? You can't see us, but you can hear us. All right. So our next speaker is Liz Wheeler, a dedicated animal advocate and co-founder of Secondhand Stories Chicken Sanctuary with a background in shelter medicine and farmed animal advocacy. She currently serves as the philanthropy officer at Fronalytics. Her presentation will explore how her work at the sanctuary helped her rethink communication with politicians and successfully lobby against backyard chicken programs. So please welcome Liz Wheeler.
Hi, everyone. I'm Liz. I'm so excited to be able to present about sanctuaries and how our tiny but mighty organizations can help shape laws and change legislation. Today, I'm going to be talking about lobbying government for change. I'll be focusing specifically on like a municipal aspect, so talking to your local cities, towns, on how we can probably influence and change some of the laws for the better. I'll start with a little bit about myself. There was a brief introduction, but I'm speaking about my experience as a sanctuary founder. So I founded a chicken sanctuary only a couple years ago in 2022, and we're currently home to 20 chickens. At the very moment, it's 14, but we're welcoming 6 more this weekend. So we have a busy weekend ahead. And almost all of them come from backyards. So owners that are either meaning well, but just don't know what they're getting into, owners that have to move and leave chickens behind. And so part of what we do, our mission, it's inspire compassion for all chickens. So part of what we do is to advocate for the chickens that we can't save. As a small sanctuary, we are limited in capacity, which is why we only have 20 chickens. And it's just not possible for us to take the hundreds of thousands of requests that we receive every year. So part of our responsibility is to speak out and on behalf of those chickens that we can't save. And for our sanctuary, what that looks like, because we have chickens, is to engage politicians to inform and shape the bylaws around backyard chicken. So I'm going to give kind of a case study of what we did that was successful. So while we're not in Toronto, we are in Canada. We're about 4 hours from Toronto. So we're actually pretty far from the jurisdiction that we were actually speaking to. We've also spoken to our own jurisdiction, Smith Falls, which amazingly banned backyard chickens, which is very exciting. But we wanted to take things a little bit further from home because we get a lot of requests from this really, really large city. Toronto is a huge city in Canada. And so them having backyard chickens is especially dangerous because millions of people there, and we definitely don't want millions of chickens in backyards in urban centers. So last April, we provided deputation, which is a fancy way of saying that we gave a written statement, a verbal statement at their committee hearing, and we shared our concerns about their backyard pilot project. And we're really, really happy to say that they actually listened to our concerns. And in May of 2023, the motion was passed by City Council, and they program. which is really exciting. The animals have been grandfathered, so when I say that they're ending their backyard chicken program, it doesn't mean that the chickens are going to have no homes and are going to call. We would absolutely never advocate for that, but it does mean that nobody can accept new chickens. No additional homes can be added to this. And there is a link there that I will share afterwards. I'll be able to share all these slides if anybody wants, that has full video of our deputation. So what I want to share with you today is a roadmap for political advocacy. So what does this look like? We think that there are 4 crucial steps for when you're advocating to policymakers. The very first step is wanting to be the expert. And so for a lot of us who have sanctuaries, I'm not sure who's in the audience today, but if you have a sanctuary, you already know you're an expert. We deal with so many absolutely wild situations and cases of animal care. It's important for us to use our voice as caregivers because we can be that expert. When we're speaking to people in governments, we can share our lived experiences, we can share what we know. One thing that I have learned since moving to a very rural township, and when I say very rural, I live on a dead-end street an hour from the closest city. So it is quite rural. Folks here do not care about animals very much. And so when we're speaking to municipalities, we can actually say, well, yes, I do have chickens. I do know about chickens. Because the number one question we get at the beginning of any time we've ever tried to advocate is, well, what do you know about chickens? I bet you've never been around a chicken before. And it's like, well, actually. So it's really important to know what you're talking about. Equally as important is knowing the process. So what does it look like when you're going to be advocating for animals in this legislative process from start to finish? When does a bill get introduced? When can you have the opportunity to speak up? When should you be following up? I want to talk a little bit about effective communication. So what are the tools and strategies and tactics that you can use to get your point across effectively? And then finally, building relationships. And I really love this graphic because it shows that the roadmap is not smooth. There are a lot of twists and turns. It is not easy by any measure. And I know a lot of people are always hesitant or worried about speaking to their local politicians because they think that these politicians are big, scary people that are just going to shut them down. And goes perfectly into my next slide, which is politicians don't know everything. I originally had this as politicians know nothing, and then I was like, well, maybe I should take a step back and not say that. Especially when it comes to animal protection legislation. A lot of them don't know, like, let's say we're talking about fireworks. A lot of them don't know the environmental consequences or how it affects animals. A lot of them will just regurgitate, so they'll repeat whatever their loudest constituents say. They really will just kind of copy and paste what they think people want to hear. So I say be the expert. You want to learn about the topic that you're advocating against so that you can become that person that the politician trusts. You can be that person who can answer the questions that they have. You become a reliable narrator in a sense. So making sure that you read through that literature and find the research. This slide, there's a lot of text. I hate to break it to you, but there is so much that goes into knowing your information. These are just a couple of things that are really good to have in your back pocket to be prepared for when you're going to go speak to somebody who is in charge of making policy or has the influence to change it. So knowing who your stakeholders are, who else is going to be speaking to the government and have their ear. Are there any vets that are going to be weighing in on this? Very rarely do they have the time. So that may be a good avenue to talk to your vet partnerships and ask for them to advocate for the animals. Are there any for-profit entities that are involved? In my case, when we were talking about backyard chickens, there were several letters that were written in support of backyard chicken bylaws because they were rent-a-chicken programs, which for folks, I'm not sure if you have this in your country. Gosh, I hope not. But there are programs in Canada where people breed chickens and rent them out for the summer and then kill them at the end of the year. It is absolutely awful. It's a horrific practice. But those are the type of folks who are sending these letters to politicians saying, this is going to help the economy. It's going to help our small business. You'll want to know, are there community organizations? So a lot of the time when you're talking about animals, you're also going to be thinking about the environment. Are there any environmental organizations that are talking about things? Are there any organizations that are in support of it? So in the case of the backyard chicken bylaws, there's also going to be organizations that are going to be talking about food sovereignty. In this case, I'll go through it a little bit later, but it's not necessarily the case. And then also stakeholders can be other counselors and the public. Then we're going to talk a little bit about planning, implementation, and evaluation. These kind of all fall under the same banner for me, but this a lot is what exists currently and does it address all the questions and concerns? So what are the risks? How will this program be assessed if it's going well, if it's a failure? What's going to happen if it doesn't work out? So when you're speaking about live animals, especially, let's say it's not backyard chickens. Let's say it is horse wagon rides. What happens to those horses when they no longer can be used for this business? What is the contingency plan? We have to think a little bit more long-term and a little bit more strategically. And then equally, who's going to be monitoring the program? Who's going to be responsible for making sure that all of the bylaws that are in here are going to be followed up appropriately? You can find some information through market research. It really depends on what you're tackling, but in this case, you can look at what similar jurisdictions are doing. That can be really helpful if other municipalities have banned a practice that you're not particularly fond of. And sometimes public opinion polling can be helpful. Usually it's not, but you should still be aware of what exists, because maybe some of the people who are arguing for a program that you're against will bring that up, and it's important to know. I'm through the backyard bylaw in Toronto. So first of all, where I started, chickens, and it's a nuanced answer as to why. A lot of people would think, well, it's better than factory farming. And yes, it definitely is. It is the lesser of evils. But as somebody who rescues chickens, I know that it is not necessarily just the amount of suffering, but the time of suffering. And sadly, in backyard chicken programs, the suffering can be prolonged by well-meaning people and not well-meaning people. So for that reason, we're generally against backyard chicken bylaws, just because there's not enough enforcement, and people who are maybe well-meaning just aren't doing a good job in caring for the chickens, and we certainly just don't want to see any animals suffer ever. So we started by looking at the City of Toronto website, seeing what existed. So straight there on their website, once you look under animals and pets, even if you just use a search bar, backyard chickens, this pops up. So from here, I'm able to see, okay, their city council staff adopted a recommendation to conclude the pilot. This is now there because it has been concluded, but before it had information on what they wanted to do. You're going to need to read everything. How much information when you're dealing with legislation, it is going to make your brain hurt so bad, but you have to do it. One of the most valuable things you can do is when you walk in to speak to one of those legislators, to know everything, to have read everything. They will be so impressed because most of them will have not read any of it. So here are just like a couple of examples of things that you can dig up through the municipal website that will be very helpful. You can see decision history. So on that far side here, you can see all of the different adoptions and at what stage everything happened. There's also always going to be a paper trail. So anytime city councils meet, unless it's a closed discussion, all of that should be transcribed and available to you. You can see on the other far corner, you can see who voted yes, who voted no. That's always a really good place to start with on who you want to approach. And then some other information that I thought was kind of interesting to add here is in the middle there, you can see a letter from a city councilor. So one of the city councilors who is going to be responsible for voting on that legislation actually was very in support of it, because her neighbors were participating in it and she wanted to participate in it. So knowing where the different counselors stand can be really, really valuable as well. But yeah, read everything you can get your hand on, because then when any of them have any questions, you're going to be prepared and ready to answer. Second step, knowing the process. Politics is a game. Can't really word it any other way. It is really finicky. It is a game of really big egos and people wanting to be right and prove other people wrong. The best advice that I can give is to just understand what people's motivations are. You can do this through those voting histories to figure out what they voted for in the past. The legislative process usually, and it depends, varied on where you're located, so I'm sorry that I can't be more specific, but councils will usually assign a committee, and this is further than just municipal councils. A lot of provinces, I'm in Canada, provinces, states in the US, even federally, so nationwide, will have committees that are responsible for reviewing and creating a report on legislation. So very rarely does legislation just go through right away. There's always going to be a process of consideration. And so finding out what the committee is that's responsible for reviewing this is going to be really helpful. Usually it's a subsection of people who is responsible for looking at this closer, asking the different stakeholders for their opinions. There is usually a public consultation survey, but not always. And that is a really, really great opportunity, because not only can you add your voice, but you can share that and you can get other folks who are really invested. You can get your supporters. So for any sanctuary folks who are listening to this right now, getting your supporters to fill out that survey is so helpful, because unlike a form, where, and that's so like when you see a petition going around and it's like, email your city councilor, do this. Those usually exist outside of legislation when it's been introduced. Sometimes it is, but when they're doing a public consultation survey, this is from the council. This is from the committee wanting to know information. So they're asking. So they're going to be a lot more receptive. And also they're going to be required to put it in the report. So they can no longer say, oh yeah, we want the program to go ahead. But in the consultation survey, 90% of people were against it. It is such a gold mine when these public consultation surveys are offered, because it's just such a great opportunity. So make sure you leverage that and use it. And then also, if you don't know what the process is, if it's not immediately clear through the municipal website, find the phone number for the city, like town hall, city hall, call and ask, and just keep connecting with different people, asking to be connected until you get the answers that you're looking for. Which leads to the next point, just being patient and persistent. It is not an easy process. It's very much a long haul process. So laws take years and years to go through. Um, like back it was 20, so like
Liz, you're cutting out here. We couldn't hear what you were saying.
no.
I think you were something with it takes years and years. Could you just repeat that, please?
Yeah. Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry.
Thank you.
I'll go back. So yeah, it takes years and years sometimes. In the case of the chicken bylaw, it took 6 years for it to fully go through the process. So just making sure that you are following up and you're just being really persistent in whether or not the counselor specifically or staff. And then I wanted to add this in as well. If you're in the USA, do look a little bit. Sorry about that, y'all. I am extremely rural, so I guess the rural internet is not in my favor today. But yeah, that brings me to my next point, effective communication. So it's really important to make a personal connection with your counselor or committee member or even their staffer. The best way that you can communicate with people, it's been proven time and time again through studies, is to explain why you care about things, and show your connection to this cause. However, it is also very important, and I know we hate hearing this. I protested this to the ends of the earth when I first started my advocacy journey. Don't say vegan. We know that most of the population is not vegan, let alone most politicians aren't vegan. There is a deep-seated belief. We know Melanie Joy is going to be speaking about it, carnism. People immediately turn off when you say the word vegan. You also don't want to show graphic photos. These are things that we should know by now. You want to go in and you want to take the approach of an educated, informed expert, not of the picture that's painted of vegans all the time of these extremists. And heck yeah, we can be extremists, but we can be extremists in a very organized and strategic way. So you want to kind of take a step back and focus on the big picture, not how this affects you. So when I go in, I don't speak about how it affects our sanctuary specifically. Of course, I do mention that in the beginning. I say we have a sanctuary, we get hundreds of requests. But then when I'm talking to them to try and convince them of my argument, I mention, okay, we're worried about public health. We're worried about the communication between neighbors and sense of community. You want to focus in on more than just what you're concerned about. Think about what they are concerned about. So I have this it's like the second part of the roadmap. So when you're talking to people, these kind of things to keep in mind. So like, what's your goal? Like, start from the very, very beginning. So you're going to want to just like brain dump everything that you're thinking, instead of brain dumping to the politician, which would be a nightmare and end up being totally awful because they have very limited time. You want to be like more strategic. I keep saying the word strategic, but that's really what you have to be. So get all of the information out, write it down so that you have it ready. But then you want to kind of go through and then like plan it out and make it a little bit more cohesive and concise. Then there's the execution part. I only put words into action, but we're going to go through it a little bit more. There's the feedback section, and everybody knows part of communication is listening. So that's the part where you're going to kind of pause and you're just going to hear what they have to say and then repeat. A part of politics is kind of just waiting for things to happen, waiting for the next opportunity. Usually these types of things, legislation, will go through multiple committee hearings, multiple reviews. There will be amendments made. And so even if it does get passed, there's still opportunities for things to be appealed. For folks who are aware of like the Canadian landscape of legislation, there's an incredible organization, Animal Justice, that just sued our provincial government and was able to overturn most parts of our ag legislation in our province of Ontario. So there's always opportunities to repeat and fix. So brainstorming. Like I said, you're going to brain dump everything. And it's really important to include kind of think about all the arguments that are going to be made against what you're suggesting. And then you're going to have those counter arguments. So you're going to want to list what the research shows. And I don't mean like, it doesn't have to be like research and data. Yes, that is the most effective and the best, strongest way that you can argue things. But when you went through and you read through everything, what else does it show? Are there like pieces of information, little nuggets of information that you can pull out and say, well, actually the public survey said this, or there was actually this I saw. And then also, again, listing overlapping causes, so environment, social justice, public health. And so the example below here shows when I was brainstorming, this is what I was able to pull together. These are just a very, very small amount, but specific to the bylaw, when I went to City of Toronto, there were statements that were submitted and oh, well, it helps with food security. But when they did their report, the average participant in this backyard bylaw made $110,000. So clearly, this urban hens program doesn't help with food security. Average participant makes that much money. And that's average. You have to think about the participants that make even more than that. Supporters said complaints, but actually their report showed that there was 17 complaints. There's also a lot of folks will say there were no cases of avian flu. Now, none of the reports or information from the C website had this. This is something that's a little bit more broad in scope. For avian flu, you're probably going to be looking on your national database because that's usually where it's going to be contained. And in this case, I was able to look up and find out that there were actually 36 confirmed cases of avian flu that month in that province. So clearly not accurate. Second stage, planning. And so on the side here, you can kind of see what almost looks like a brain dump, but it's a lot more organized. So this is where I started to break down all of the things that I wanted to cover, things that I thought would be really important, and kind of outlined them. So at the very bottom, I have be strategic. I broke these down based on who my audience was. So going into this council meeting, this committee meeting, I looked up all the different councilors and what their previous votes had been and what they had said. And so from there, I was able to garner, okay, their first and foremost thing that they cared about was not the animals. They could care less about the animals. It was all about public health. They were really worried about avian flu, and it was all about the amount of money it costs. Because they got an estimate from the municipal licensing office that said that it would cost $2 million to run this program. So that's why that's number 2 and 3. It's like the very top things. This side is the comprehensive document that I attached to them. So this is actually an entire like PDF file that I submitted that's like 25 pages. It's huge. It has all of the information. It links to every research study, everything that I could find, so that they had something that was really, really cohesive that they could look to. But you're going to need to prepare something much, much smaller. Like I said, politicians don't have a lot of time. They really just want the Coles notes of things. So when you are going, if you're going to do a deputation or provide testimony at one of these hearings, which anybody can do, any member of the public can sign up to do it, at least in Canada, that's what our laws are. They will give you like between 1 and 3 minutes to speak. So you have to really know what you're going to say that's going to have the most impact. So in our case, when we spoke, we got a lot more time than 3 minutes because we were so informed and we provided so much information that we got a lot of questions. And so while we only had 3 minutes to talk at first, they gave us a lot more time in question and answer period. And then the other thing, are you going to present alone? Are you going to speak alone? Or do you have other people or relationships that you can leverage? So are there other sanctuaries around you that you can write a joint letter? Is there a local vegan association or vegetarian association? What about those environment organizations? Are there any national organizations that are working on this? Is there a coalition that you can join? Having the support of others makes your presence a little bit stronger. However, it's not absolutely required. And then one of the other things is a total ban feasible? Like, it depends on what you're asking for. But in this case, we did ask for a total ban on backyard chickens, at least in the urban area. It did not make sense. There was no way in which they could operate it that would be humane for chickens and that would address all the concerns that they had. But let's say you're talking about fireworks. Maybe a total ban isn't feasible right out the gate. But what you can do is you can suggest, okay, well, what if they only have it during the holiday time? That's much less. And then the next time you're reviewing, where you can suggest that they make an appeal, and then it's a little bit less and a little bit less. So as much as we hate to do it and compromise, sometimes if we go in asking for it all, it's just not going to happen. You have to be a little bit flexible. And then execution. So don't do this. Please don't be a conspiracy theorist. We don't want to go in and be like this and this and this. And do you know that like the egg industry and like big dairy, don't say big dairy ever. It will not work to your benefit. You also don't want to talk about really sad cases of animal rescue. Personal stories can be helpful if they establish your credibility. So like, let's say you worked in a veterinary clinic, or you work for a nonprofit organization. So for example, when I go and I speak, I say, yes, I run a sanctuary. I have chickens, so I'm aware of their health conditions. I also work for an animal rights organization. I've worked in animal protection for 10 years. Those are the type of information that helps build credibility and helps you establish a baseline that they, yes, should trust what you're saying. Also, don't add to the problem. Don't say, this is awful, like we need to just stop it. Go in thinking about what they can do instead, what they can do to make it better. And propose alternatives. Like I said before, like sometimes just ending something completely is not gonna work. But if you have like a solution, the politicians are going to be so much happier for it, because they don't want to be the ones who are trying to figure everything out. If you go in and you say, this is wrong because of XYZ, but you could do XYZ instead, they're going to be so much happier because they have to do so much less work. You also want to be willing to meet with junior staffers. A lot of them have the ear of the counselors. Some counselors, it really depends on where you live. If you live in a smaller community, maybe they have a lot more time. But if you live in a really big municipality, they may have like 3 minutes, 5 minutes to give you in a meeting. So being able to establish a relationship with one of their staffers who will trust you and have a good relationship with, who will get you in that door, is going to be very, very helpful. Don't go in and say, I'm only going to meet with the counselor. Like, I don't want to speak to you. I only want to speak to George. It's not going to be a good first step. Don't exaggerate. So if you don't know something, be honest and say, I'm not sure. Because if you give false information, that ruins your credibility. It really will just throw everything you've worked for out the window. Be respectful and professional and leave emotions out of the conversation. So when you go in, you're going to want to be prepared, respect their time. Again, going back to like the personal stories, don't go in and immediately start crying about a chicken or an animal that you couldn't save, because there's nothing they can do about that. That's something that's happened in the past. Yes, maybe that's why you care about the things that you care about, but, and this is going to sound brutal, they don't care. They don't care why you care about animals. They most likely eat chicken that night for dinner. So by going in and being really like straight to the point about why they should care about the issue, is going to be a lot more productive with the little time that you'll have with them. Feedback. So like I said, most of the time when you are having any kind of conversation, it's really important to pause and listen. So if they don't share anything, if they just sit there and are listening, prompt them, ask them, say, well, what do you think about this? Do you have any concerns? Which way are you leaning? What do your other constituents think? For example, so this is a quote from Chris, who is one of the counselors at that committee meeting where we provided deputation, said that his sister has a farm up in Hastings and has 30 chickens. So by listening and getting that extra tidbit of information about this counselor, I was able to customize my communication and what I said to this counselor in response to this question, rather than going in with, well, we shouldn't have chickens at all. I was able to answer this and say, well, it sounds like you're asking like why it's different to have chickens in the country than having chickens in the city, which was ultimately what that bill was about, what that legislation was about. It wasn't about whether or not people should have backyard chickens in the country. It was about whether or not people should have backyard chickens in the urban center of Toronto. So I was able to focus in on, okay, well, there's the concern about avian flu. Yes, that would be a concern at any farm, but because it's such a densely populated area, the risk is higher. So you have to make sure that you're really giving the opportunity to listen to everything. And I know I have about 5 minutes left, so I'm almost through. This is like the heaviest portion of it. And repeat. So we all know bureaucracy is a time suck. You might have to list your concerns, follow up like a dozen different times. So you can see here, this is my former member of provincial parliament. So he was my representative. So as you can see here, some of the things say, hey, Peyton. Peyton is his staffer. So I started communicating with Peyton instead of Joel because Joel has limited amount of time. There's a kangaroo that escaped and got hit by a car and killed. And these emails, it doesn't show on the side, spanned from April to October. But at the end of it, I actually was able to get the result that I wanted. So you just have to kind of like constantly follow up, make sure that you're being kind. So like you can see here, hey, Peyton, just wondering if there's any update on this, just straight to the point, recognizing that they don't have a lot of time. And then one of the stages, building relationships, get to know the counselors. How do they identify? What's their voting history? Who are you to them? The best way that you can build a relationship is with your own politician. So they want to know what their constituents say, the people who can vote them back into power. Maybe where you live is not the most animal friendly and you're going to have a harder time building a relationship, but it's still worth it because at the end of the day, they care that you can vote them in or somebody else. All right, so to summarize, this is just another way of wording everything that we covered. Learn everything you can. So be the expert, find out as much information as you possibly can so that when those politicians have questions, they come to you first. Identify how to contribute and when to contribute is really important. Plan what you're going to say and build the relationships. I have a slide here that has some additional resources. So some of the things that I mentioned, there are two really, really incredible organizations, the Collar Animal Law Forum, Animal Legal Defense Fund, and then also, of course, shout out to Analytics where I work. They help with quite a bit of the information that I was able to pull on effective advocacy, how to communicate. So make sure you take a picture of this slide. There's some great links here. And then if you want to connect with me further, if you have any questions that can't get answered through the Q&A portion, or you want to connect with me on LinkedIn or follow our chickens on Instagram, these are the links of where I can be reached at.
Thank you, Liz. All right, so I'm just going to look around the room if there are any questions. Maybe from the online audience. Okay, so there are no questions, but thank you so much for your presentation, Liz. It was very interesting, and we're so happy to have you. Thank you so much.
Thanks. I'm so sorry about the internet stories. I can see I'm frozen there, so hopefully it's a good frozen face. And if anybody has any questions after the fact, feel free to reach out to me personally.
Thank you so much for sharing all this information. Thank you.